Listabarth. I said that correct, right? Listabarth.
Absolutely correct.
Okay, man. I just wanted to make sure. Man, Martin, I am so thrilled to have you on Jazz Piano Skills, man. We have been trying now for a couple months to get this, arranged and set up. And it's exciting because Jazz Fuel reached out to me
Hmm.
several months ago and introduced me to you, and I was immediately blown away by your playing.
Wow,
And
thank you.
oh my gosh, you are one of the young lions, up and coming superstars in the music world, in the jazz world. And so I was so very grateful that Jazz Fuel connected me and introduced me to you. And it was just a natural fit to have you on Jazz Piano Skills because uh, I love introducing new artists, new musicians, new jazz pianists to the Jazz Piano Skills community.
Hmm.
And man, you're in Vienna, Austria. Is that correct?
I'm in Vienna, Austria. Yeah.
So we're doing a little international work here on Jazz Piano Skills. That's
It really is.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so listen, we have a lot to talk about today, a ton. And there's no better place to start than at the very beginning. So I just want to turn the microphone over to you right now and let you introduce yourself to the Jazz Piano Skills community. Tell us about Martin. Tell us about your childhood, how you got into music, your education, your background, what you're doing today, and so forth. So give us all the scoop on you.
I grew up in Vienna in a family where both of my parents play piano just for fun, but this was the first time I was immediately drawn to this instrument. And so my biggest wish was to start learning the piano very early. And so I received classical piano lessons at the age of 5.
Wow.
And but from the very beginning on, I was also very interested in playing around with bits and bytes of the pieces I was supposed to learn. So this was my natural way to go into improvising, even if I didn't know the term for this. In,
Right. So you were taking bits and pieces of classical music
of classical
and you
music.
right, and you were
And
messing around with it.
I was messing around with them, changing the rhythm, changing the harmonies,
Oh
and
man,
trying to make
I'm
stuff
sure
with that.
I'm shocked you didn't get kicked out of the classical world, man. You're not supposed to do that. Good for you, man. I'm proud of you. That's awesome. So okay, go ahead.
And my parents were also listening to a lot of classical music, so this was, of course, my first big influence, surrounded by music.
Right.
And so I've listened to a lot of Bach and Brahms, and yeah, that's still one of my favorite composers up to now. And I was also singing in a choir, which was also very
Oh, yeah.
supporting for doing music with others. And you have all ear training and this stuff
Right.
going along naturally with this. And I have also three brothers. They are triplets.
Wow.
the, all,
Wow.
all, all three of them are were playing instruments, cello, trumpet, and drums. And so a very weird combination. Um, um,
Yeah. Right.
but they were my first victims, for they had my compositions to play. So
Oh, that's so funny.
I write little pieces for this crazy crazy ensemble, and yeah, they had to play them.
So it was cello. Wait a minute. Cello, trumpet, drums, and you.
Yes, correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting combo there, my friend.
Yeah. We have some recordings, but I'm not sure if I want to listen back to them.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So okay. So you grew up. Your parents are musicians, then, right? Your parents.
They're not professional musicians. They're both teachers, but for different subjects.
Okay, got it. But they have a obviously they have a love for the arts. They have a love for music. Got you into music at a
That's
very young
true.
age. It's you're playing. It's quite obvious in your playing that you have a strong classical background. Um, your technique and your whole approach to the instrument. It's wonderful. It sounds fabulous. So okay, so where did you go to school? You studied academically. Where did you study music?
Yes, it's on the University of Performing Arts in Music and Performing Arts in Vienna,
Okay.
and I'm really grateful for my great jazz piano teacher. A really cool
Who
guy.
was who was it? Who was he? Who taught you
Um,
jazz?
his name is Heribert Happy Kohlich.
Yeah, right. That rolls
He's
off the tongue.
he's an Austrian guy, but he has played with some of the great American jazz musicians as well. For example, with Art Farmer
Oh wow.
um,
There you
and
go, man.
and
Wow.
guys like that. So there was really a lot I could learn from him, and I'm really thankful for this opportunity.
And he was there at the university?
And he was there teaching at the university in Vienna. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. Before we go any further, I want to let the Jazz Piano Skills listeners know you had mentioned to me right before we started the show and started recording. This is your first interview in English. Is that right?
Yes, that's
Is
right. And I'm really excited about it.
Oh my gosh, you're doing fantastic, man. It's just awesome. It's unbelievable. So, okay, so before you got to the university, were you exposed you had to be, right? You were exposed to jazz before you got to the university. You didn't get to the university and all of a sudden get
Of
introduced to
course, yeah.
jazz. Right. Okay, so when did you get introduced to jazz? You were doing classical music as a young child. When did the jazz influence start to happen?
I think it started at my teenage age, when I was listening to a lot of pop and rock music and to Radiohead, for example, and then I
Right.
found out that there was a guy, Brad Mildau, who
Oh
was
yeah.
doing cover versions of Radiohead songs, and this really hooked me. So this was my first introduction to jazz, and then of
That's a
course
great first introduction.
I was hooked, and I tried to find everything out about Brett Mehldau, his music, his recordings, and yes, that was my starting point.
Oh, that is fantastic. So it's interesting. As a child, then you were doing classical music and you just kind of instinctually, without really knowing anything about jazz, you were just kind of instinctually manipulating the music and kind of improvising and recreating. And that was happening before you actually formally got introduced to jazz.
That's true, yeah. But
Wow.
and then it was like a revelation to see that jazz is the art form where you can where can do this, and where you have this playful approach to music, and that's what I love about this so much.
Right, right. So, okay, so you get to the university, you get introduced to jazz. Is that a degree in jazz, like a bachelor's degree in jazz that you
Yes,
earned there at the university?
it's a degree.
Wow, that's fantastic. Okay, so at some point, you went to the university, you started studying jazz. Was it at that point then that you kind of made this shift from classical music to leaning more toward the jazz, or are you doing both equally at the same time?
Um, no, it was at this time where it shifted more to the jazz side. Um,
Okay.
and I wouldn't consider myself as a classical pianist, but of course I still have a huge love for this music. That's for sure.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about the jazz scene in Vienna, Austria. Obviously, it must be it's pretty significant, right? They're offering a degree there at the university, so I'm thinking that there must be a demand, an interest. What's the jazz scene like in Vienna, Austria?
I think there's there's a lot of things changing and a lot of things going on in the last couple of years, and that's a good development because there are
Right.
more and more players, and we have there's one big jazz club in town which is called Porgy and Bess,
Oh,
which is really really great one where you can see all the great guys from America and elsewhere playing there. So and there are a lot of young bands playing their own version of jazz music, which is quite interesting, and there are a lot of interesting guys around.
wow, that's wonderful. So have you been to the United States?
No, not yet, but of course it's a dream for me to visit the States, and yes,
Yeah, I bet your first stop's going to be New York City, right?
that's true. Yeah,
Birdland, going to the jazz clubs, and
of
right?
course
Oh,
I have to
oh
do this. Yeah.
yeah, of course, right? All right, so let's talk a little bit about a couple projects that you've done. You've got a couple albums that you've recorded. Most recently, your second one, called "Dedicated,"
Yeah,
right? And your first album was called "Short Stories." Am I correct?
yeah.
Let's talk about these two projects because they're fascinating. You're playing on these recordings on these albums are it's just tremendous. It's very captivating. I when I was first introduced to it by Jazz Fuel, I clicked on and started listening to you. And I got to be honest, man, a lot of times I start listening and maybe somebody might hold my attention for a few minutes and then I'm like, okay, I got it, right? But for you, but for you, but for you, your music is so unique in your playing and your sound. I hit the play button and I kind of settled back into my chair here in the office, and I literally just kept listening and kept listening and kept listening. So it's a great compliment, man, because you
Wow,
just
thank
sucked
you
me.
so
You,
much.
yeah,
I'm flattered.
yeah, yeah, you sucked me in, man. So I really enjoy your playing. So let, talk about those projects, short stories and dedicated. Talk about those for us.
Yeah, starting with my first solo album, Short Stories, there was the idea of transferring my autobiographical experiences into music. So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
why the title is Short Stories. It was influenced by experiences, people I've met. There's one song from my grandmother, who
Nice.
I didn't know in person because she died at very young age. So everything I know about her is from pictures and stories about her. And from
Wow.
these stories, I've tried to figure out my musical picture of her. And
Oh,
so
wow.
this was one way of where pieces developed. And
Yeah.
I've always loved to have some out of music inspiration for my pieces, and then trying to figure out how I could how I could transfer this to music.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right? We always think about music having an influence on culture, but culture and relationships and people have influence on our music, and that's what you're trying to bring to the surface. The influences, the important influences in your life
Yeah.
from the people that you have known or you've experienced through literature, the influence that they have had on you personally, and then expressing that influence through your music.
And the fascinating thing about it is that it makes life so more exciting because everything could be a source for the next piece.
Wow, yeah, it's fantastic. It's really it's quite fascinating. So, okay, so what about dedicated? You have several influences there. Talk to us a little bit about some of the influences in with dedicated that you've wrote your compositions, because you're very much a very accomplished composer, right?
Mhm.
We're talking about jazz piano, but you're a composer as well and very
Wow. Yeah.
accomplished. So, right? So talk about the compositions in dedicated and how all that came about.
Yeah, the idea of dedicated was to dedicate each piece to one person, and that are all persons I really admire because they,
Mhm.
yeah, they have their life or the work they've done has fascinated me very much. So, for example, there's one piece dedicated to Diego Maradona, the famous soccer player, and
I noticed that. That was great.
and of course, Diego Maradona is famous for his ability to have a very strong left foot, and so I thought on piano we have also left and right. So I want to find a piece where I can give the left hand a lot to do. So I try
Right,
to
right.
find a pattern which is going through the whole piece in the left hand, and that was the idea for this piece.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So, okay, so what do you have in the works? What do you have in the works right now? Do you have a third album that you're currently working on, a third project? And if so, how are you approaching that one?
Mm, at the moment, I'm working a lot with my current trio, um, classic jazz piano trio with drums and bass, and we are playing a lot of my compositions from my two albums, Short Stories and Dedicated, but I'm also trying to write some new stuff for this trio. Yes, and that's probably the next
Yeah.
upcoming
Yeah,
project I want to record.
I listened to your trio. In fact, last night I was sitting down listening to your trio. You have some, I think, videos on your
Yeah,
YouTube channel.
there are some videos. Yeah,
Yeah, I really enjoyed that too. The whole trio approach is very unique. It's a very unique. I like it a lot. It's a great sound. So I'm anxious to hear when you finally with your trio maybe do an album, do a recording with the trio. That would be great.
yeah, that's probably my next steps and plans. Yeah.
Yeah, that's tremendous. So, okay. So I just want to let all you listeners, Jazz Piano Skills listeners, you have to check out Martin's, dedicated and short stories performing. And they can do that right at your website, also at YouTube, correct?
Yes, and they're all, and you'll find it on Spotify and all the streaming platforms as
Right,
well.
right. Okay, awesome. So now let's talk a little bit about jazz piano. Okay, and then we'll talk about composing and composition here a little bit too. But I want to start with jazz piano. And I want to talk about, I want you to share a little bit about how you practice. Some of the, everybody, every student, everyone who is getting into the art form of jazz and trying to develop their skills as a jazz pianist. I think everyone is quite aware of the importance of technical skills,
Mhm.
learning scales and learning arpeggios. Those seem to be some of the first skills right out of the box that every aspiring jazz piano has to confront and has to deal with. So let's talk a little bit about how you have approached the study of scales and arpeggios and the application of those skills in your own playing. Can you share a little bit about that?
Mhm. Um, I think due to my classical background, I was quite familiar with this kind of scale practicing and arpeggio practicing
Right.
from very young age, and this probably helped me a lot when being introduced to jazz music because yes, I was still familiar to this kind of practicing, and but with all the great music of classical composers, you always have the opportunity to see where these great composers put these arpeggios and scales
Right.
into
Yeah,
music
right.
and
Right.
make them sound good.
Right.
And that's what we need as jazz musicians as well, of course.
Right. So do you, from a jazz perspective, do you practice the scales the same way as you do from a classical perspective? I mean, do you practice? Are you d- do you have various ways in which you approach practicing the scales, or do you kind of just bring the classical your classical training? You know, in the classical world, we're always taught, practice scales: one octave, two octave, three octave, four octave. Right? We're
Yeah.
doing like scales and quarter notes and eighth notes and triplets and 16. The routine, right? I mean, this is what we're taught in our classical piano lessons. But is that how you practice the scales, or did you start adding variations to the way in which you practice scales that deviated from that traditional classical approach?
I think the most important aspect is which I want to practice when I practice scales is the rhythmic aspect. That
Ah,
I always practice with metronome when I playing some scale stuff, and I try to play patterns within the scale, and yes,
y-
put them
yeah, that's
put them through the whole scale, but always with a metronome and trying to be steady in rhythm.
yeah, that's fascinating, right? Because we get stuck in a rut playing the scale the same way, just going up and going down, and we
Yeah,
don't we don't uh, we typically do not spend time creating variations within the scale rhythmically, right?
yeah.
So that's very good. One of the things I'm curious, one of the things that I do that I practice and I have students practice is I always have students practice scales from different entry points. So they're never, they become root independent. So we're not always starting the scale on, you're not always starting the C major scale on C,
Yeah.
right? Starting it from different points, like the third or the fifth or the seventh, and having a different entry point and a different destination point. So you're actually kind of rotating that scale, seeing it from different angles. Do you do any of that kind of
That's
practicing
great.
with the
That's
scales?
great, and it's so important because that's hopefully the way you'll put them into music when you're finally playing and not starting on one all the time, and also rhythmically, not always starting on beat one with your scale or your scale pattern.
Fantastic. That's right. That's very, very good. Not starting on one. We do that all
Trying
the
to
time
start
too.
what it sounds if you start on beat two, on beat three, on beat four, or even one end or something like this.
You're correct on the
On the
backbeat, right? On the
offbeats, yeah.
upbeat. Right, yeah. Yeah, that's really, really good. And the same thing with our arpeggios, right? We tend to get in this rut of practicing from the root to the root, but we don't hear music from the root to the root,
No,
right? Music is not That's not how
it's
music
not
works,
happening.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So, I like practicing arpeggios to the ninth or to the 11th or to the 13th. So I'm hearing those sounds. You do that kind of practicing as well?
But I'm probably more more into practicing certain phrases I like. Maybe we come to this point later, but transcribing is of course very important for me. And if I transcribe and I found one phrase which, for example, introduces arpeggio in a very clever way, then I want to keep this phrase and practice this phrase because so I have a natural entry point how someone of the great masters put these arpeggios into music.
Yeah, that's interesting. Transcribing, let's talk about that a little bit because every jazz musician has a little different approach to transcribing. In fact, I just did an interview recently with John DiMartino, who he actually said he doesn't transcribe. He just doesn't transcribe. And then you have other musicians, Michael Brecker, who used to say that he kind of, I think, from what I'm hearing you say, he would like if he heard something that he liked, he would transcribe that. He wouldn't necessarily transcribe the entire solo or the entire composition. And then other jazz musicians do sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to take this Art Tatum version of T for two, and I'm going to transcribe it from the beginning to the end.
To
And I'm
the
going,
end, yeah.
holy cow! So
Wow, yeah.
where do you fall in that spectrum? Are you kind of listening and then kind of going like, wait a minute, what is that? And then you go transcribe that and then apply it. Is that what I'm
Yeah,
hearing you
yeah,
say?
that's, I think that certainly changed over the years. That when I was at the very beginning of my journey to jazz, I was also the transcribing whole complete solos because I wanted to get everything at once. and
Right.
and this was just too much information for me
Oh
to.
my god. Oh, right? It's like overload.
It's like overload, and you can't use it. You
Right.
have this completely complete transcribed solo, and it was a load of work. But there's nothing you can do with this at this stage at least, and
Yeah, right. Right.
um,
Well, and and would you agree with this? I've always told students that, the whole point of transcribing is to discover you. That's really what transcribing is about. A
yeah,
lot of times we think that, oh, I'm going to take a Bill Evans solo, I'm going to transcribe this Bill Evans solo and somehow make that solo kind of my own that I can replicate it or play chunks of it whenever I want to in another piece of music. And I go like, well, that's not really what transcribing is about. Transcribing really is about allowing, allowing Bill Evans to help you find you.
yeah, and I totally agree with you. And that's also the reason why I don't like it if people ask, for example, what should I transcribe? Because you should transcribe what you love most and what you
Right.
what
Right.
yeah, and you feel it what what this is, and that you should transcribe, and there you should search and yeah, trying to find the things in music you love most.
Right. Right. Fascinating. Okay, so along those lines, because transcribing obviously is important for ear training, it helps us develop our ears. But what other ways in which what are some other ways that you worked on developing your ears to be, jazz ears? What are some other ways in which you approached ear training?
Um, I tried to learn jazz standards by ear by listening to my favorite versions of jazz
Yes.
standards, and
Yes.
that's my go-to way to learn new jazz standards,
Yeah.
and and yeah, through this you learn a lot about ear training as well, not just the songs but also about ear training.
Yeah, I try to stress to students all the time, if you want to learn a jazz standard, well, first learn the melody by ear. Just go to the piano
Yeah,
and start picking off. Just play the melody by ear. Do not go to a fake book or a real book or whatever and try to and read it. Just go play it by ear. Now, Martin, this may shock you, but I have some students who'd rather go to the fake book or go to the real book and just learn the melody out of the off the piece of paper. But I think it's great ear training just to sit down and poke out melodies.
yeah, and at the beginning you don't have to be too shy to just do small portions. Maybe it's just the first 8 bars, and that's okay, and that's
That
enough.
is that
But
is that's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
but
Yeah,
you'll have
right.
more
Again,
from this than just looking up at the fake book.
you are absolutely 100% correct, my friend. That is exactly right. And you know what's funny is you start playing by here's what's really funny. You start playing picking out melodies by ear and you start getting good at it, you'll never go back to reading again. You don't want to try to read it. You'll just play it by ear.
Yeah,
Right?
that's so great about it.
Yes,
Yeah,
right. So, okay, so improvisation, right? There's a lot of in your playing, obviously, I know you're a composer, but and you have compositions, but in your compositions, obviously, when you listen to you, there is a lot of improvisation going on. So how this is an interesting question, and I want you to kind of reflect upon this and try to articulate it the best you possibly can here. But how do you practice improvisation? And see, and that's kind of a funny question, right? Because I think most people think that, well, wait a minute, isn't that a contradiction? I mean, practicing improvisation, shouldn't improvisation be improvised? But right? But that's not it, right? That's we know that's a fallacy. So, how do you practice improvisation?
yeah, that's a hard question because it, yeah, it's so hard to find a good solution how to practice improvisation and to make steps forward in this. And I think you what's the most dangerous thing is to not practice improvisation, because then you always play the same things over and over again. Of course,
Right.
every one of us have our favorite patterns
Of
list.
course. Of
Um,
of course.
and that's also okay, because yeah, that's kind of what your sound is, and that's absolutely fine. But if I want to grow, I have to kick myself out of my comfort zone, and that's yeah. Maybe I
Yeah.
can do this while my practice sessions. And one way I try is to um, I'll try this is to start a solo and have a different concept in mind every time I play one chorus, for example. And I say, okay, I'm playing this chorus, and I play as less notes as possible. And
Ah, right.
then the next chorus, I say, okay, let's do another one. I just want to do a solo with much chords in it, and heavy voicings and stuff like that. And then
Right.
it's the next turn, and I say, okay, what's about playing some fast lines now?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's interesting because what you're saying, I totally concur with. I agree with you 100%. What you're doing is you're actually establishing a criteria uh, for that chorus, right? You're saying, here's what I'm going to do during this course, and then you stick to that criteria. For instance, what I like to do, and I have students do, is like I might have them like take just a simple progression, like a 2-5-1 progression,
Yeah.
right? And I'll have them. I set up some criteria saying that you're going to use ascending motion on the 2 chord, descending motion on the 5 chord, ascending motion on the 1 chord. So we create this kind of ascending, descending, ascending line.
This
And
shape,
I'll go
yeah, that's
right,
great.
the shape, right? And then I'll even go further and say you're going to ascend using scale motion, you're going to descend using arpeggio motion, and you're going to
Wow.
ascend using scale motion, right? So I set up this criteria that we go this is what we're going to do as we improvise over this 2-5-1. And then we might go from one key to another key to another key to do that, right? So I think that's really important when practicing improvisation to
Hmm.
actually have some very rigid parameters put in place in
Yeah.
order that you can develop improvisational skills. And see, and that's a kind of a dichotomy as well. We always
Yeah,
say,
that's
"Whoa,
also
wait,
a
wait a minute."
paradox as well. Yeah, because you have to be you
Right.
have to be very strict and very strict, and then freedom could come within these
That's
restrictions.
right. That's right. That's right. There's an old expression, what do you call a river without banks? Well, the answer is it's a swamp. It's a swamp, right? It's out of control. And so in music, in improvisation, we have to practice with these banks in
Yeah,
order to
you have to
develop.
channel it. Yeah.
Correct. That's right.
And
Yeah.
also,
So
this reminded me, for example, you can practice motivic development in this way
very important.
you described it. For example, just take one small motif, could be three notes, could be four notes, and try to put it to different chords and make it work for different chords in your
Yeah.
progression.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's very powerful. That's a very powerful approach. Um, so do you do that? Do you do like a lot of where you extract like a harmonic motion, like a 2-5-1, 1-6-2-5-1, some kind of turnaround, and then focus on that and practice improvisation that way? Or is it always in the context of a song?
No, it's not always in the context of a song.
Okay.
I, I always love to play around with just little parts of chord progressions, and and trying to do some improvisation with this, because it's easier to have everything in one place, and not
Right.
always a
Right.
whole song.
Right. Yeah. Well, it goes back to what you were saying about ear training, just playing 8 measures, learning 8 measures, right? I think it's the same kind of approach in that you go like, look, I'm just going to take some kind of harmonic motion, common motion that I see in all these tunes. I'm going to take that common motion and I'm going to explore that and maybe move it around to different
Mhm.
keys. I think that's a very effective and efficient way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So now, um, let's talk about, another thing that's really striking when I listen to you play is your approach to voicing.
Hmm.
So, how do you, as a composer, obviously your compositional skills have a great influence on this and vice versa. How do you approach the study of and the practice of voicings on the piano?
Mm, I think my first jazz piano teacher gave me
The, at
at
the
no,
university?
it was before university. It was
Oh, okay, okay,
in my teenage years, and he gave me this
okay.
book of the Mantooth voicings. I don't
Oh,
know.
The Frank Mantooth voicings, yeah, where with the chordal, the fourthy shapes.
Yeah, 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 genau. Yeah, this one.
Yeah, that's a great book. So
So
was that your first book, first introduction to voicings?
that was my first introduction to voicings. Yeah.
Hey, tell your piano teacher he did really good because that's a great book. That's awesome. That's a great book to sink your teeth into.
And he really thrilled me to practice every voicings in every key and every progression in every key, and every week we do some stuff out of this book.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Frank Mantooth is a fellow University of North Texas State graduate. That's where I did
wow,
my master's and my doctorate degree. I was at North Texas, and Frank Mantooth was a graduate of UNT as well.
wow,
So
that's amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's great. Um, so okay, so from there, then what happened? That's a great introduction to voicing. How have you shaped it, shaped voicing to become personal, to become yours?
I have to say this is probably from listening to music I love, because
Wow.
okay, then I had this concept of Mantooth voicings, and you can find much music where pianists use these voicings, but then there are other stuff, probably more modern jazz, more
Right.
contemporary jazz, where you find a lot of different sounds. And I was always curious, okay, what about these sounds? Where did they come from? For example,
Right.
Jet Mildau's voicings are completely different. I don't think he uses Menting's voicings.
Oh, I'm sure he studied them though.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. Right.
But yes, but then I tried to figure out, okay, what kind of voicings he is using, and
Right.
and that influenced me a lot. Trying to
Right.
figure out what voicings my heroes are using.
Right. So that's fascinating. So compositionally, then, when you sit down to compose your pieces, and and you would describe your compositions as jazz compositions.
I would describe them as jazz compositions because there are always parts where there is improvisation, and that's what I love about this compositions, because when I play them live, I don't want them to play every time the same. So
Right.
I'm really grateful about that. I have the opportunity to have these improvisation parts in it.
Right. So how do you approach your composition as a jazz pianist? Do you start melodically? Do you start harmonically? Do you start rhythmically? How do you when you sit down, like you're going to sit down this afternoon and you're going to start composing a jazz piece? How do you, Martin? How do you approach that?
Um, there's a lot of ideas coming from just playing and messing around at the piano, and maybe I'll find some vamp, some chord progression I like, and maybe some groove or kind of
Uh huh.
rhythmic context I want to play this chord progression in, and then I'll take this as a starting point. because you asked what is the first thing, and it's mostly harmony and rhythm, I would say.
Yeah, right. So yeah,
To be
you
honest.
set you start kind of with a harmonic motion, a groove,
Yeah,
and then from there, melody will come to you from that groove and
that's
from that
right.
harmonic progression. Yeah. Yeah, you know, because that's always fascinating, right? Everybody, it's kind of like the chicken and egg question. You know, which came first, the
Mhm.
chicken or the egg, right? I get that question all the time. You know, when I said when composers write, do they start with a melody, or do they start with harmony, or start with rhythm? And I always tend to answer that question that it's not a either or, because
Yeah,
it's a both and, right? Because you may find that all of a sudden a melody pops in your head, and you start from that perspective one time, and then another
true.
time it may be the harmonic motion is what triggers it, or it could be another time the rhythm that triggers it, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you know, it's not one way or the other. It's a combination of all when it
What's your approach? I'm always curious. What's your approach to composition?
Well, I tend to, because I think as piano players we tend to approach things typically most of the time harmonically.
Mm-hmm.
Y Right? We tend to start with a harmony and a groove like what you're talking about.
Yeah,
We're kind of conditioned that way, right? We're kind of trained
yeah.
that way,
That's a piano
right?
player, I think.
That's it's a piano player thing, right? Um, so I would tend to agree with you. I lean more that way than the other. However, what's really important, what's really ironic about that, it's when it's all said and done, the most important thing that always surfaces is melody.
Mm-hmm.
Is melody. So if you have a strong melodic line, I always tell students, and I tell them this too with regards to improvisation, harmony will always bow to melody.
Yeah.
If you have a strong melodic idea, you can have all kinds of weird harmonic stuff underneath that,
And
but it will
and it
always
will work.
that's exactly right. If you have a strong melodic idea. On the other hand, though, if your melodic idea is weak, like if you're improvising and you have really weak melodic ideas, harmony will expose you. Harmony will devour you, because it will just show that you're wandering,
Yeah.
right? So if your melody is strong, your harmony bows. And if your melody is weak, your harmony will dominate and expose
Yeah.
you. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right. So talk a little bit about your influences, because when I listen to you play, I sit there. One of the questions I asked myself when I was
Mhm.
listening to you play, man, who does he sound like? Who does who are his influences? Right?
And
Because
what popped
a
up in
lot of
your mind? What popped up
oh
in your mind?
oh my gosh, man, it's you know, I'm going to tell you one piano player that popped into my mind, and I'm sure you're aware of him. Joe Sample. Are you aware of Joe
Yeah,
Sample and the
Joe Sample, of
Crusaders?
course. Yeah.
I thought last night I was listening. I said, "Man, he sounds." I hear some Joe Sample in there. Um, uh, I hear influences from Keith Jarrett in
Hmm.
your playing. But it's interesting because I was trying to figure out who would be your most influential artist and musician. So share with us who influenced and who inspires you.
Yeah, as I said before, Brad Mildau is, of course, one of my biggest influences because
And it's obvious. That's obvious too. I hear that in your playing as well. Yes.
and I think this comes from his love for classical music as well, and he combines of such a great way the jazz world with classical harmonies sometimes, which are
Right.
and that's what I really love about his music and what I'm trying to do as well. And so of course Brett Miller is a big influence. Keith Jarrett, his solo concerts in the
So
70s.
that's yeah. That's why I was picking up on that as well. Yeah.
I've listened a lot to his of all his solo records, and I really love this stuff. Um, and yes, from this, then I wanted to find out, okay, what were the guys um, who were where were Brett Mildau listening to, and I
Ah,
go backwards in jazz history to find out what might be his influences. So I was in so on this way I was introduced to Bill Evans and
right.
Wynton Kelly. Wynton Kelly I really love
Fabulous.
for his swinging, so amazing. and
Fabulous.
and all the great jazz solo piano players like Fats Waller, for example, his stride piano is so amazing. And
Yeah.
I've checked some of this stuff out as well, and I really love this.
Yes. Yeah, that's great, right? We can't, we can't ignore history, right? Going back
Yeah,
to like the early players like James P. Johnson,
James B.
Fats
Johnson,
Waller,
yeah.
right? Bud Powell, all these influential pianists from the early days of jazz to contemporary. I always tell students you just can't jump in at Chick Corea. You got you have to study jazz history and be aware of uh, the evolution of the art form. And in fact, I actually think that evolution is actually our blueprint of study on how to
Hmm.
become an accomplished jazz pianist. I mean, that how jazz has evolved is exactly how a student should evolve when studying music.
Hmm.
And a good example of that would be, if you go back and listen to early jazz, it's obvious that the guys soloing were thinking very vertically, right? It started where, if you have a C dominant chord, they're messing around with the notes C, E, G, and B flat. So they're thinking very vertically. And so I would encourage students to begin improvising to think very vertically, right? To think C, E,
Yeah,
if you got a C dominant chord, mess around with the notes C, E, G, and B flat,
yeah,
right?
and try to make something musical out of this. Yeah.
Right, and you can, and
Yeah, you
and
can.
you can,
It's possible. Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And in fact, I can remember when I was doing transcriptions of, I did a lot of transcriptions of Red Garland. I was a big Red
Ah,
Garland,
wow. Yeah.
right? I loved Red Garland's playing, especially with Miles, and I can remember transcribing Red Garland, and it'd be like an F major chord, and in the I'd transcribe it, and he'd play F A C E in his solo, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, that's impossible. That can't be right. And so I would transcribe it again and it come out FACE and I go, that's not right. It's got to be something because it sounded so good.
Yeah.
It sounded so good that I thought there's no way that Red Garland could be playing FACE on an F major 7 chord. There's no way. It sounded too good.
Yeah. I had so many of these moments you have just described where you listen to something and you say, "Wow, this is so great!" And when you finally have transcribed it, you say, "And that's it? That's all?"
That actually, my friend, that actually might be the biggest benefit of transcribing because
Yeah.
when you get done transcribing, you go, that's it? That was it? Yeah, it's
But
very good.
then you listen back to the, yeah, and it's just the right notes at the right moment.
Right. With the right touch, the right
Right
articulation.
articulation in the right context, and yeah,
Yeah, that's right. That's
that's the
exactly right.
mystery behind it.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So, okay, so you've gone back. Obviously, you've done your homework, and you've gone back and you've studied and listened to, the old jazzers. You've listened to contemporary jazzers, and so, who are some of the young pianists that you're listening to? I know you mentioned Brad Moldau, but gosh, Brad's like kind of an old guy now.
Yeah,
So,
nowadays, yeah.
yeah, right. So who are some of the who are there any young influences that you're listening to that are more your age? Because what are you, like 12? What are you, 14? You look so young, man.
Ah, that- little bit older than 12.
Okay.
I, I'm I'm 31 now.
Man, yeah, you're a young lion. So who are some of the 30-year-olds that
Yeah.
are influencing you
Um,
today?
I really love the music of Tigran Hamasyan,
Oh, wow.
Armenian jazz pianist. Do you know
Wow.
his music?
Yes, yes. So
And
that's awesome.
and he is a really amazing player, and he is such a strong rhythmic
Yeah,
idea and unique approach to rhythm, and
right.
and he
Which I always like. I love pianists who are strong rhythm percussive, very
yeah,
percussive. Right.
and he combines the jazz language with the language of the traditional folk songs in his home country, Armenia.
Right. Wow,
And
that's awesome.
that's really, really beautiful music. And one other player in his 30s is Shai Maestro.
Mm,
He has played with the contrabassist and with the bass player Avishai Cohen a lot.
right. Right. Right.
And now
Right.
he has
So
his own quartet, and yeah, that's really really beautiful stuff. And I
that's
Shai
awesome.
Maestro is a huge one for me.
Yeah, there's so many great players, aren't there? There's so many great
Yeah.
players. Young and old. There's just so many great players. We're so blessed and so fortunate to have so many wonderful influences
And at
in
the same time,
jazz.
I'm always afraid that there won't be enough time to listen to all the great stuff which is out there.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I'm curious, are you doing any teaching? Are you teaching now? Do you have students that study and work with you?
I have some students I teach, but not so many. And yeah, but that's an interesting challenge as well.
Yes, well that's right. Right? I think teaching is
And you
so
learn a lot from that.
well, yeah, because what teaching requires you to do, forces you to do is to articulate verbally your convictions, your musical convictions. And the better that you can articulate your musical convictions, the better you will be as a performer,
Yeah.
right?
And there are always moments when I'm teaching where when I say something to my students, um, check out this and this, practice this and this, then I think, oh, I should do this as well.
Oh yeah, right. No,
This
yeah,
happens so often, yeah.
yeah, because so often we're teaching the very things that we should do,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I totally get that. I totally get that. So, okay, so what's next? I mean, I know you said you're working with your trio and maybe putting together a trio album. Do you have any engagements coming up, concerts coming up? When do you plan on coming to the States and unleashing your music in the United States? When's that on the calendar?
Yeah, we have to fix something. but there are not no unfortunately there are no plans at the moment to coming to the States, but hopefully one day maybe we'll see.
Oh,
But
that'd be great.
that will be great. But there are some concerts in Europe coming up, and I'm really looking forward to this in May and June. I'm playing some concerts in Austria, in Germany, in Romania, and yes, that's the
Oh, that's
plan
fantastic.
for the next month.
And are those concerts notated on your website? Can listeners go to your website and see those dates?
Listeners can go to my website and will find all these dates.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm hoping that maybe some of those concerts have some live streaming that people can tap into and maybe see you perform through technology. That would be
That would
fantastic.
be great, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, really, I guess the way we want to kind of conclude and wrap things up, I would love for you just to take a few minutes and give some words of inspiration to all the Jazz Piano Skills listeners who are now studying jazz and trying to improve their skills as jazz pianists. What are some words of encouragement, some words of inspiration that you can share with the listeners to help them along their journey to becoming an accomplished jazz pianist?
I think it's one of the most wonderful journeys you can do because there's so many great things to discover along the way, and um, I would say just embrace this journey, and yeah, don't. It's good to have goals, and it's good to wanting to become better, but at the same time you have to appreciate what's already there, and
Oh.
what you have the opportunity to discover through this music.
Yeah, you know, you just touched on a really important point as well, right? So many times with students, um, they fail to celebrate where they already are musically,
Yeah,
right? You know, you do not have to have the technical skills of Oscar Peterson to play great jazz and to play great music. You just
yeah,
right and so I think what you just said is so very important to be, you know, to take the time to celebrate where you are in the process, your ability to enjoy and make music right now with the skills that you have, and just
that's
know that
true.
it only continues to get better as you continue to study and as you continue to practice. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Martin, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day. What time is it there in Vienna, Austria? I'm just curious. What time?
it's 5 o'clock
In the afternoon?
in the afternoon. Yes.
5 in the afternoon? That's nice, right? It's early here in Dallas, Texas, but I'm glad that I'm glad that we got we've hooked up and we finally made it happen. Would
Yeah, I'm
love to
so
have you
glad,
come.
so glad.
Yeah, I'm so very thankful that Jazz Fuel reached out and introduced me to you. It's been a joy. I'm thankful for our friendship now, and look forward to our continued friendship over the years, and look forward to having you back on Jazz Piano Skills soon as
Yeah,
well.
I'm looking forward to this too.
Yeah.
Thanks so
So,
much for your invitation.
oh, it's been my pleasure, and on behalf of all the listeners of Jazz Piano Skills, thank you, Martin, for sharing your expertise, your wisdom, your talent, your gifts with us today. It's so very much appreciated. So I encourage all the listeners to go out and check out Martin. It's Martin Listabarth, Vienna, Austria jazz pianist extraordinaire. Go check out his recordings on his website. He's got a lot of stuff posted at YouTube, and you can always reach out to him. They can reach out to you through your
Of
website as
course,
well, can they
every
not?
time. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So if you have any questions for Martin or want to reach out to him, feel free to do so. He will get back to you. And Martin, again, thank you so much, and we look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you so much. All the best.